When it comes to dating apps, let's just say I'm definitely not a fan and don't recommend them. That's mainly down to the nightmare experience I had myself using Tinder. Now, I'd been trying dating apps for a month or so. I was new to them and just exploring to see what it was all about. I had matched and met one guy off there at the time, and the date didn't go great. We met up for drinks, but ended up saying our goodbyes and going our separate ways. After the first date, I continued to use the app and ended up matching with another guy, who, in all fairness, caught my eye straight away. He was tall, handsome, and had amazing blue eyes. After messaging back and forth with flirtatious banter, I thought this was going well, and maybe dating apps were in fact useful. After a few days messaging, that's when Mark asked to take me out on a date and meet. I liked the thought of meeting him and definitely wanted to go on the date and get to know him better. So, we planned a day and time and arranged to go for a meal and drinks in town. When the night came, and as I got ready for the date, I couldn't decide what to wear. Did I go with a dress and leather jacket, or blouse shirt and leather pants? It took me a while to decide what to wear, but finally being happy with my choice, and making sure my makeup was on point, I headed into town for the date. As I reached the restaurant, I texted Mark to tell him I was there. It wasn't long until I got a reply, saying he could see me. And as I looked up, sure enough, he was there, as he waved over to me. It was definitely him from the pictures, which was great. He greeted me with a smile and a hug, as he said how nice it was to finally meet in person. We entered the restaurant and checked into our table. As the night progressed and we had a few glasses of wine, I thought how well the date was going. We laughed, shared stories, and seemed to bond well. Throughout the date, I couldn't help but think there may be something here. As we finished up our meal and got the check, Mark suggested the idea of going on a nice walk to let our food go down, suggesting we take a stroll through the park around the corner. I thought it was a nice idea and agreed, as I didn't think either of us wanted the date to end at that time. As we paid our bill and left the restaurant, we began our walk to the park. Even though it was dark, we didn't care as we continued to talk, Mark leading the way as we entered the park. Being late on in the evening, it was, as you'd expect, quiet and peaceful, with people few and far between. As we continued walking into the park, we left the hustle of the streets behind us, Mark suggesting we follow a certain route where he knew there was a beautiful spot by the lake. Within the park, I followed as he held out his arm for me to grab onto. As we continued to walk, it became quieter. The further we retreated into the park, the less there was around us. We'd been walking for a while now, and I remember saying to Mark, maybe we should head back soon. He didn't respond though. As we walked, he became more quiet and less chatty than usual. I asked if everything was alright, as he said everything was fine and for us to keep walking. We were almost there. As we continued, I noticed Mark scanning the area like he was looking around for something. I know you may think how stupid of me not to think this before, but it was only then I got that uncomfortable feeling that I was walking with someone I didn't really know at all. I mean, it was our first date, and as well as it had gone, I didn't really know him, yet I'd walked into a quiet park at night with him. As this thought finally dawned on me, I began to question our decision to come into the park, having this gut feeling suddenly kick in. I told Mark I thought we should turn back, and that I wanted to head back right then. He turned and looked at me with annoyance, as if angry that I was asking to go back, as he said no. I told him I was going to head back either way. As I went to turn, his grip tightened on my wrist, as he squeezed, pulling me towards him. Shocked, I told him to let go, and that he was hurting me as I tried to push him away. Again, his grip tightened, as his other hand grabbed my arm as he pulled me into the wooded area. My heart was racing. I was terrified at this point. The look on his face had changed from the nice guy I met to an angered, predatory look filling his eyes as he dragged me close to him, as he told me to get on my knees. I screamed as I kicked out at him, trying to get free, but my efforts were met with resistance as he overpowered me. I couldn't break free. As I lashed out, he pinned me up against a tree as I screamed. He told me to shut the fuck up and do as I'm told. Tears rolled down my face as he stood in front of me, breathing heavily. It was then the call came out from the distance, causing him to quickly look around. As he was distracted, I had to act fast, and with all my force I threw my knee up in between his legs, causing him to let go as he fell back in pain. I began to run, as again I heard the call from the distance. I could see coming into sight a man and a dog walking towards us. I screamed for help as the man saw me. I looked back as Mark was now back to his feet. The dog must have sensed the fear in me, as he began to bark and growl towards Mark, causing Mark to sprint off in the other direction, the dog giving chase. I ran towards the old man. As he hurried towards me, asking if I was okay, I told him what happened. As his dog came back into sight, the man stated he was walking his dog as he often does at night, and he had heard the screams in the distance. Concerned something was wrong, he came to check. I am so thankful that he did, as I can't comprehend what would have happened if he didn't. After calling the police and going through that traumatic experience, they took all the details off me, the description of Mark and where I'd met him. His dating profile was gone, but the restaurant we ate at was contacted to view the CCTV footage, which was a clear help gaining his identity when investigating. It wasn't long before he was found. I say he, as his name wasn't even Mark. He'd been using fake names and accounts on unsuspecting women, and had previous convictions for sexual assault. This time, he was finally taken off the streets and behind bars where he belongs. That experience has changed me in many ways. There is nothing scarier than going through something like that, and that is the reason I never use dating apps anymore. I urge you all to be careful out there when doing so. Really be sure who you're talking to before meeting, and don't make the same mistake I did. I'd recently moved into a new town for work purposes. I didn't know anyone in the area, and I was a single guy. So, being single, and not knowing many people in the area yet, I decided to turn to dating apps to fill my spare time, and see if I connected with anyone. The apps I used most were Tinder and Badoo occasionally. Tinder being the main focus, I'd previously used dating apps and had been on a few dates from there before, so being in a new area, I began swiping right to most of the women I saw, to see what matches I would get. I soon matched with a beautiful looking woman named Michelle. With the few pictures she had on there, she looked hot, and from reading her profile, she seemed to be great to get to know. After we matched, it wasn't long at all before she messaged me and I was filled with excitement. I replied, and from there on, we messaged most of the evening, getting to know each other better. After a day or so messaging, I decided to ask Michelle if she wanted to meet for some food and drinks at a nearby restaurant that I'd heard good things about. She was more than happy to meet, so we arranged a date and time, being that coming Friday evening. On the night, I got myself ready and drove to the restaurant. I arrived early so would get there before Michelle did. I texted her telling her I had arrived and for her to let me know when she was there, and I would meet her before heading to the restaurant together. I got an instant reply that said, "I'm already here. Not long arrived, I'm already inside at the bar area." Wow, I thought to myself. Clearly eager like myself. So I got out my car and headed inside. As I walked in, I headed over to the bar area and began to scan, looking around for Michelle. I couldn't see her. That was odd, I thought, as I pulled out my phone ready to text her. But it was then I noticed a woman approaching me from the other side of the bar. As she got closer, it was then my heart sank. As she reached me, she greeted me. "Hey, it's Michelle." And as I looked at her, it was her, but clearly her photos had been heavily edited. She looked different, a lot older than she did in her pictures and gaunt in the face. I quickly snapped back into reality, not wanting to be rude as I greeted her and asked how she was doing. I was met with an awkward one-word answer, "Fine," followed by an awkward silence. To break it, I didn't really know what to do, but suggest we head to our table. So speaking to the host, we were soon escorted to our table. Still surprised about how different she looked from the pictures. I could have questioned it, but didn't. She was still the same person from the pictures, and I didn't want to seem rude, so I decided to still go through with the date, thinking she may still be a friendly and bubbly enough person, like she was through text. Was I right? Sadly no. As the date went on, the conversation became more awkward. It was always me carrying the conversation, and being met with minimal conversation back. I asked if she wanted some wine for the table, but she told me she didn't drink, and that alcohol was the devil's poison, followed by a strange laugh as she proceeded to order a water. Even the waiter gave a strange glance at the creepy laugh. As the date went on, I could only think of how I wanted to get myself out of there and home. After finishing up our food, I pretended I was too full for dessert and would get us to check. Luckily, she agreed, and as the bill arrived, I grabbed my wallet, slightly waiting for a second to see if she'd offered to pay towards it. Not that I have a problem with paying, Just the pure fact I knew this date was dead in the water, and there would be no second. But no, I paid the check and couldn't wait to get out of there. As we walked outside, I turned to say goodbye and wish her a good night without making it too awkward. But she turned, asking, "Do you want to go and get another drink?" I really didn't want to, so I told her I would just be heading home actually, as I was tired. She then asked, "Are you not going to invite me?" I was surprised by the question, and again, without being rude, I told her that I was just going to head home as I was tired, but I'd had a fun night. She simply stared at me, in a creepy way, not blinking, before finally saying okay. Relieved, I walked over to my car, turning back to finally see her walking to hers. When I arrived home, I was pissed off at the night, but relieved to be back, and it was over. I wouldn't be seeing Michelle again, and hopefully she wouldn't want to text or see me again with how the day ended. At around midnight, as I was getting ready for work, my phone pinged as I received a text. As I looked at it, I saw it was from Michelle. Great, I thought, but as I opened it, my stomach churned. The message read, "I'm outside." What did she mean she was outside? I went over to my front window and slowly pulled down the blind to look out. I couldn't see anyone out there. Looking back at my phone, there was another text, as it vibrated in my hand. "Are you going to let me in?" Shocked, I text back, "What do you mean?" As I looked out the window again, my heart jumped into my throat. As I peered out through the open blinds, my eyes were met with a set of eyes trying to peer inside it. It was Michelle, standing outside my window. I said, "What the hell are you doing?" as she began to walk off to the side. It was then there was a knocking at the front door. "Are you going to let me in?" she said. I told her no, and that it was inappropriate for her to just turn up at my house. Which, by the way, was running through my head. How the fuck did she know where I lived? She began to shout through the door that she didn't understand why I was being like this, and why I didn't like her, that she believed the day had gone well and I was just being like every other guy, and trying to ghost her. I couldn't believe it. I told her that I was sadly not interested and I wouldn't be ghosting her. I just wasn't interested and there wouldn't be another date. This seemed to anger her. She began slamming on the door, demanding to be let in so we could talk about it, and I could explain what the issue was. I told her she needed to get off my property now, or I'd be calling the police. After seemingly kicking my door a few more times, I repeated I was calling the police. She finally seemed to get the hint and walk away. Quickly looking out the window, I saw her get back into her car and drive off. She must have followed me back as I was driving back from the restaurant. I couldn't believe it. It was one date, and it didn't work. There was no need for that type of reaction. Clearly she was unstable. I quickly blocked her and was relieved that that was the end of it. But I was wrong. Later, that night as I slept, I woke up to the sound of banging. As I shot up, I could hear it was coming from the front door. It couldn't be, I thought to myself. Surely she wasn't back. As I slowly approached my bedroom door to look down the stairs, it was then I heard the sound of glass smashing from my kitchen. I ran downstairs as I dialed the police, and as I turned the corner, it was then I saw Michelle, halfway through my broken window as she tried to make her way inside. This woman was crazy. I shouted for her to stop, but as our eyes met, I could see the anger in hers. As she screamed, I had wasted her time and she was sick of being treated like dirt. I told her to get out, as I slammed the door shut, heading back to my room, locking the door behind me. I didn't know what this woman was capable of. The police were en route, and as I waited, she screamed through my bedroom door we needed to talk. When the police finally arrived, they had to forcefully remove her from the house. She was taken to the station and charged for breaking and entering and damages to property. But the scariest thing was, I found out her name wasn't even Michelle. Her details on the profile were all made up. I got a restraining order in place, and after that whole ordeal, I thankfully never heard from that woman again. So be careful when using dating apps out there. I know my experience may be rare, but you can't be too careful when it comes to meeting people online. I downloaded and used many dating apps over the years, but one experience nearly cost me dearly. I found it easier at first to meet people online and talk, getting to know each other that way instead of the awkwardness of meeting someone face to face. I know meeting someone online, you'll still meet them face to face eventually,
but it broke the ice and made it easier for me that way. I'm from Oregon, and have always been one for taking trips, so I never really set up my profile to look for local women in my city. I pretty much talked to people from all over the country. This caused me to come across a woman I began talking to, called Jessica. She was 26 from LA, and to be honest, she looked beautiful in her profile pics. We made an instant connection, and began talking non-stop for the first few weeks, and ended up video calling each other a few times. It was great. I really enjoyed talking to her, and felt so connected, feeling that we had a lot in common. It came to a point after talking for the first couple of weeks that she suggested we meet face to face. I jumped at the idea. The distance wasn't so much of an issue, as I drove and always wanted to take that trip to LA anyway. I had a friend who had moved out there and was living in the city who was more than happy for me to make the trip and stay with him, saving on accommodation fees. So, with all of that in place, we decided on a date and I made the trip out there. A long drive, but I thought it would be worth it. When I arrived and finally met Jessica in real life, she looked even better in person. No one expected catfish, it was genuinely her. We spent the whole day together and it was amazing. She was fun, easy to talk to, and from the impression I got, was really into me. After having been for drinks and having dinner in the evening, I went back to my friend's place to crash for the night. I thought to myself, Jessica seemed perfect. I could really see myself getting to know her more and even see a long-term future with her. That night I told my friend about her and showed him a picture of her. Upon viewing it, he agreed she was attractive, but he seemed to study the picture longer than expected. He told me that he felt like he recognized her, had seen her somewhere, but he couldn't recall where. I didn't know if he had or hadn't, or if she just looked similar to a woman he had seen before. Either way, it didn't bother me, and with him unable to place it in his head, we soon changed the topic and had a great night catching up. The next day, I'd invited my friend and his girlfriend out with me and Jessica, obviously running it by her first, but she was happy to do so. We went out as a group that day, which ended up being a really good day, and it seemed my friend and his partner liked her. That evening, we invited her back to my friend's house with us to continue the night, but she didn't agree. She said no, putting it down to being tired. It was disappointing, but no problem, as I would see her the next day. That night, at around midnight, just as I was getting myself into bed, I received a text. It was from Jessica and it read, "I really want to see you tomorrow, but only us two this time, and I have a great idea if you like the sound of it." The text was soon followed by another, "Let's go camping. I know a great place." Camping, I remember thinking. It was out of the blue, but I actually liked the idea. I liked the thought of spending a few days away with her, just the two of us, in what I assumed would be great scenery. Obviously short notice, my first thought thinking of camping supplies and equipment, but she said she already had camping equipment as it was a hobby of hers. So I agreed, and I couldn't wait, although I would have to extend my break slightly from work. The next morning, I told my friend of our plan and that I wouldn't be there that night. She hadn't told me where we would be going camping, but I was up as early as I was told we needed to be to make an early start to get there before dark. She was the one driving, and she seemed happy to do so we began our journey. I observed on the journey that every time I tried to make conversation with Jessica regarding her family, she would go quiet. Her mood dropped, and she wouldn't answer. I assumed it may have been a touchy subject and changed the topic, not wanting to persist on it. As the drive continued, the conversations became less and less. I assumed she was concentrating on driving, so I offered to swap, but she said no, it was okay. She didn't mind the drive. After a long drive, we began to arrive at a forested area with less and less around us. She said we were almost there, and that there was a beautiful lake in between which she was going to direct us to. She had been there many times before. When we parked up, I could see what she meant. There was a massive lake situated in the forest. We had all the stuff we needed for camping, so we began to set up shop. After setting up and getting a fire going, I noticed Jessica was acting weird. She wasn't as talkative. She stopped smiling. To be honest, I didn't know what was up with her. I decided to ask her if everything was okay, but she didn't say much, just saying she was fine. It was completely dark now, and this hadn't turned out to be the trip I thought it was going to be. Now fully dark, Jessica got up and said she was going to pee, and she wandered off into a wooded pathway and just disappeared. With what seemed like an age, she never reappeared. After a good few minutes, I began shouting her name. There was no reply. She didn't shout back, and I could see no sign of her. At this point, I was becoming concerned. This was just so weird. I didn't know if she was okay or not, so I began looking for her. As I walked down the way she had disappeared, I just kept walking, with no sign of her. I must have walked 10 minutes in shouting her name but nothing. Beginning to freak the fuck out by now, I was worried not just for her but for me. I didn't know where the fuck I was. And then, laying straight in front of my path was a run-down cabin. Standing there, in that moment, for a minute I just didn't know what to do. Check it out or head back. There was no lights, but I could see the door was slightly open, not shut. I had no idea if she was, or if so, why Jessica would be in there, but I decided to check it out. I shouted her name, but again, I got no reply. As I made my way up the steps to the front door, I couldn't hear anything. I reached my hand out, pushing the door open, and the creak it made sent my pulse racing. I wasn't expecting it. The door, fully open now. I couldn't bring myself to step straight in. Instead, I grabbed the frame. Muttering Jessica's name somehow, I peered my head in, and as I did, what I saw sent my heart racing. I froze. I could see through the darkness of the room, a figure standing in the middle of the room, motionless on a chair. The figure was, to my surprise, Jessica. But not only that. In the corner of the room, behind her, was another tall figure of what seemed to be a man. I didn't know what to say. It was then Jessica stood up, saying, finally, I'd found them, and that this didn't have to be difficult if I just cooperated. I didn't understand, my heart pounding as I asked what the fuck is going on. She just laughed. As she did, the figure of the man lunged out of the corner, making his way to me, shouting that I do not act stupid. He was older. His eyes looked crazy, full of hatred. I wasted no time, turning my back, jumping down the stairs and running back the way I came. My heart pounding, I couldn't bring myself to look back. All I could hear was the gaining footsteps following me, along with Jessica's crazed laughter in the background. Tripping slightly, I stumbled to the ground, picking up the nearest object I could find, a large rock, looking back at the man who was almost on top of me. With no hesitation and fearing for my life, I launched it just as he was over me, hitting him square in the face, sending him crashing to the ground, holding his face. Adrenaline picking me up as fast as I could, the laughter behind me turning into crazed screams. The sight of the campfire now in front of me, I didn't have a clue where I was going to go. But honestly, I feel an angel must have been watching over me that night, as I grabbed Jessica's rucksack. A saving grace was the fact that the car keys were in there. She hadn't taken them. Leaving everything behind, I jumped in the car, starting the engine and putting my foot down to get out of there. As I did, from the clearing, I could see the psychotic face of Jessica coming down from the clearing. Nothing like the girl I had met. The most haunting thing to me, she was holding a blade. Not knowing where I was going, I drove until I found the open road, and as soon as I was able to get the signal, I pulled over to call the police. The area I was taken to was searched, the cabin was found, but no sign of Jessica or the man. I gave as much detail as I could, looking to get Jessica's dating profile up. Of course, all of it was gone. An extensive search of the area was done. Luckily, I had a picture taken of her days prior. On giving it to the police, I found out her name wasn't even Jessica, and the woman that I had met was on the police records for previous convictions, similar to what nearly happened to me. Burglary, luring men under fake identities, robbing and assaulting them, with whoever her partner was. It's safe to say, that event nearly cost me dearly. Even could have cost me my life. I have not used a dating app since, and never will. To everyone that does out there, be careful. My experience may be very rare, but these things do happen. We hope you enjoyed delving into these creepy encounters with us. What situation would have terrified you the most if you were in that position? Let us know in the comments. As always, please like, comment and share, as it really helps the video and the channel out. And if you haven't already, subscribe and join the world of horror motives for more chilling horror content, and drop some suggestions of topics you would like to hear in the future. Thanks for listening. Until next time, fear lies within.